Welcome to this morning's meeting of the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. Today is our second session on major events, and we are joined for our first panel today by three witnesses with really great experience of major events and their legacies. So we've got Phil Batty, OBE, who is the Chief Executive of Glasgow 2026 Organising Company. Welcome, Phil. We've got Ruth Hollis, OBE, who is the Chief Executive of the Spirit of 2012, which is obviously the Olympic Games legacy. And then we've got Claire McColgan, CBE, who is the Director of Culture and Major Events for Liverpool City Council. A huge welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for coming. Before we begin, can I just remind members to declare any interests before you ask your questions? So I would like to kick off. Now, our predecessors on this committee did a report in 2022 on major cultural and sporting events, and they said, and I'm going to quote, "Whilst individual occasions may well deliver more memorable moments, we see no golden thread linking the events or tying them to a vision of the future of this country." Since that report, has there been any progress, Ruth?
So I think there's been progress in some areas, but in terms of the golden thread, I don't think there has been progress. So I think we've seen really exciting progress in terms of the events that UK Sport are bringing to the UK, in terms of the City of Culture announcement that's happened, both Bradford finishing new City of Culture, new Towns of Culture. But I think what we see is that the collective impact and what that says about the vision for how we use events in the UK is still missing. After the Select Committee recommendation, we took that challenge very directly because we also had an inquiry into major events in 2023, and they came up with a very similar recommendation. So we've worked with Mark Scott and his team at the Warwick Business School to do two reports, creating the golden thread and connecting the golden thread, to look at how that might happen, how we might bring more cohesive and coherence both to the ecosystem around events, but also the vision for how we use events in the UK. And as part of that, we've been convening stakeholders right across the events ecosystem, sport, business, ceremonies, culture, and right across the UK. And what we've found is a real consensus around the need for more join-up, for more cohesion, and for working better together in terms of that golden thread.
And that's something that keeps coming back through our evidence, that we need some kind of major event strategy, something that collectively brings everyone together behind a sort of common goal and purpose. Everyone knows what they're aiming for. Phil, do you agree? And what would a major event strategy look like?
I definitely agree that there's more work to do on bringing the golden thread together. I think a major event strategy kind of has three key things that it needs to deliver. The first is vision. We need a long-term vision. So this is great to know that we've got a huge pipeline over the next 3 years, but what does 10 years look like? What does 20 years look like? Because that's the planning cycles which major events are delivered. I think we also need to understand from a major event strategy how sport, culture, art, social cohesion come together, because actually one thing we've seen through all our major events is they all deliver incredible social impacts, and I don't think we've seen enough about the intersectionality of those sectors and how major events unite them. And then thirdly, a really clear pathway into government, so understanding how through a major event strategy we can work with the full might of government to deliver major events that have more impact. And I think that's where great legacy will come from, is really making these impact first decisions around what's in the pipeline and how we execute those major events.
Claire, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think from a regional perspective, Liverpool's put culture and major events at the heart of its generation for the last 20 years, and you can see the difference. So you can feel it if you know, for those of you that know Liverpool. And I think from European Capital Culture right through to Eurovision and beyond, the key for us was bringing a major international event that talks about Liverpool as a place, but also talks about it on an international stage as well. So a really good example of that is Cunard. You know, the brand of Cunard is attached to Liverpool. I work from the build of the Cunard building. It's got a huge story and a huge history to tell, but it's also an international brand, and so is Liverpool. So we brought both of those together, sailed 3 ships down the Mersey, have 1.2 million people attending, and it was just truly wonderful. But it was international, you know, just because it was in Liverpool, that kind of went around the world and did really well for it. So I think the key about a major event strategy for the country is to make sure that regionally there is that voice, and there is the voice that tells a story not just of that place and the brilliant stories that we've got across the whole country, but how then you take that into an international national stage as well, and then use that to sell the UK. Not all events need to be led and run from London. You know, they can be run from places that have got an exceptional story to tell.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. So, Ruth, if we were to bring forward a major event strategy, I mean, A, from your opinion, is there anything else that you would throw into the mix about what it would look like? But B, would that need legislative backing? I mean, what would be the sort of items that you would include in a kind of major events bill, for example?
So I don't think it does need legislative backing necessarily. I think it is a kind of a two-piece strategy, really. One is setting out that vision, as Phil said, then looking at how we coordinate across the UK, and then thinking about what the kind of government, the route into government is. It is at the coordination level that we need much more. I think what I would add to what Phil and Claire have said is it can't just be about the events that we bring in. It needs to be about the UK generating our own events. It also needs to be about the events that happen year in, year out. There are the big set-piece things, Tour de France, Commonwealth Games, brilliant, but year in, year out, communities, cities, towns host events. And it's about seeing the overall impact of them and being more coordinated. So the other thing I would say is, you know, we can see in Scotland where a nested national and local event strategy works very well together. When we started the consultation across the nations, there was a bit of pushback from Scotland and Wales to say, well, actually, we've got our own event strategies. Thank you, what would you add? And I think we need to be really careful that a UK event strategy isn't just adding up what's in all the other strategies, but actually adds in that vision and what the coordination is at a national level. I wouldn't have said there was a need for legislation, but Phil and Claire may have a different...
I'll go along. So a major event strategy, but not a major events bill, Claire.
I think it just needs a big vision, doesn't it? Because actually, you know, if you look at something which isn't a major, if you look at something like Heritage Open Days, you know, they're great. Everyone does those across the country. But if you imagine if you knit all that together beautifully, across, you know, and move them to somewhere where it's quiet for tourism for the UK, so you move them to January or February, you've suddenly got a whole national picture, but with individual stories within that. And I think the key to anything that is about creating a national event story is, yes, we do the set-piece events and we do them brilliantly. We've got Tour de France coming to Merseyside, delighted about that. But where are we inventing those events that we can grow? What are those real kind of fantastic things within our communities that you think, right, okay, if we give that event 11 million, 12 million, what could we do with that and fill that place? And I think that's a key kind of, that should be a key kind of thing about where we go next, because that creativity in the event sector is out there. You know, it is extraordinary, and people are doing it on a voluntary basis all over the country. But everywhere in this country, there are moments where you just go, that could be fantastic. Yeah. And I think kind of knitting those together to create a national picture rather than a national body going, right, okay, we need to do this, this, and this, and we're doing this. That just doesn't work. I think you need those voices to rise up and choose those real moments that make us feel better as a country.
Yeah, we definitely need that. Phil, anything to add to that?
I think the thing I would say from an event delivery organisation perspective is what we definitely need is more coordination and more efficiency and thin slicing of what happens at local level, because we have incredible working relationships with local authorities, and what needs to be delivered at a UK government or devolved administration level. So I think in terms of the amount of time that's taken to coordinate that from the perspective of an event deliverer, anything that gives us more efficiency in that space would be welcome and valid. And we also do need something that can last the test of time. So whether that's legislation or whether that's other foundational documents, if this isn't locked in for 20 years, the iterative continuous change will be the thing that destabilises it. So that kind of, yes, vision, but also long-term ambition is fundamental.
There is a role for government and government departments, and
Absolutely.
which I think we'll come to in a minute, but it doesn't need to be a statutory one. That's what you're saying. David, did you want to?
Actually, I just wanted to ask about how. So knitting things together sounds great. It's a bit like joined up government or an integrated transport strategy. The question is how you do it. So you said not a national body, not necessarily legislation. So and who would make those trade-offs? So, I mean, I think your point about the off-season and thinking of it as a yield management opportunity is all wise, but doesn't it need a bit of a guiding mind?
I think it does need coordination. So you need kind of a coordination strategy or a coordination group at the top. But you've now got kind of mayoral authorities, and you've got other authorities kind of growing up around the country that all of them have got culture really strongly as part of their kind of devolution deal. But how you kind of bring those together, you've got Visit Britain, you've got Visit England, you've got all the kind of arm's length bodies that the DCMS look after. We'll talk, Eurovision is a really good example of that. Eurovision brought the whole country together in Liverpool for Ukraine in a really incredible way, but that was led by DCMS over 6 months under quite very difficult circumstances, and it was a huge success for the country. So it's not beyond anyone to be able to do that. And I think the thing about events that is very different is there's always a deadline. So it's you've got a deadline. You start an event on a day and you finish it on a day. You've got to work to a deadline, and the event sector is really used to working like that. And I think if the kind of skills that are within that sector about getting things on and getting them done are kind of looked at, you could bring people together across the country, because there'd be enthusiasm there. Look at the enthusiasm for Town of Culture and City of Culture that kind of spilled out everywhere, when DCMS announced it last week. People want to be proud of their places and they want things happening in their places. And it's when government take an interest in that that suddenly everything can be lifted up. I don't think it's that difficult.
Why hasn't it happened?
I think from my perspective, I think the learning about things sometimes doesn't kind of go through. So I am going to pick up on Eurovision because for me it was practically perfect, and I've worked on a lot of events, including kind of the event research programme, which Eurovision learned a lot from. But we worked in 3 parallel lines. There was the city and the region, so I led on that. We did all of that. We did the kind of making it feel fabulous when you came, all those brilliant things. The village, the BBC put on the most incredible show, extraordinary. And the government worked hand in hand with us to open and unlock doors across the whole of government. So a team led by Robert Spectorman Green, DCMS, worked for 6 months solidly to get that show on. Those three pillars work really well.
I don't want to interrupt you or be difficult. So what I'm trying to get to, because that's all about that event, and you can talk about the Greater Manchester Authority or the Liverpool City region, but I think you were talking earlier about coordinating, so that we fill hotel rooms in January and on Sunday nights, and the police force aren't trying to be in 5 different places at the same time. That and travel is cool, that sort of thing, and that's the bit. Because you say both, it's important and shouldn't be too hard. So it's a reasonable question to say, well, if those 2 things are true, why doesn't it happen?
Don't ask anyone else's questions.
Sorry.
I guess if I can add in from a Glasgow and Scotland perspective, the fact that we have an event strategy for the city led by Glasgow Life, one of the arm's length bodies for the city that looks after culture, sport and heritage, that means there is a coordinated portfolio approach to which events are right for the city that harmonises with the wider festival calendar across Scotland, harmonises with the hospitality and tourism sector. What's great is that then docks into a Visit Scotland national event strategy. So actually we're looking at that the major event can't exist without the community event. We're looking at the Highlands and Islands. We're looking at it in context. And I think we have seen, you go back as far as European Capital of Culture 1990, the Garden Festival, you look at the Commonwealth Games in 2014, the portfolio approach since, the UCI cycling, the festivals. The reason we've been able to host a Commonwealth Games in 2026 in less than a year of coordination and collaboration is because that events ecosystem has been nurtured. But the reason we've got a clear plan for the future is those 2 strategies don't compete, they complement each other. And I think a UK strategy would sit alongside those 2 to provide that kind of golden thread and that uniting steer at the top.
Leads us directly on to Jeff's question. So Annalise, I'll come back to you.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Thanks. So just trying to dig into that a little bit. So it works in Scotland, clearly, but on a UK level, we're entering an era even more than ever of kind of devolution. And you talked about the mayoral authorities, which are all very ambitious for their regions and will be competitive against each other. I'm from Manchester and Lisa's from Liverpool. We 2 fantastic cities, but 40 miles apart, who will be wanting to do similar sorts of things to regenerate our areas. So it goes back to this issue about who coordinates, who brings all those threads together, and how do you get a national strategy that interacts with all those individual ambitions and strategies of the individual devolved authorities?
I think it needs a better front door from DCMS, probably a single front door into DCMS. One of the things that, and DCMS have got much better, I think, at coordinating internally over the last couple of years, but we are still talking to a major event and sports team and a culture team and a ceremonials team and a community team. So much better coordination in DCMS as the kind of front door. I'm not sure it then needs a cross-government team, but it does need that DCMS front door to coordinate across other departments, so transport, Home Office, departments that are dealing with some of the social issues, health, well-being, that are being delivered through events. I then think it needs some oiling of the wheels locally, and actually what we're seeing when we go out and talk to people across the UK is that there's a real willingness both from combined authorities and local authorities who have the ambition and already want to harness events, but also some of those places that are perhaps a bit further away from devolution, who are more worried perhaps about being left behind as the combined authorities become stronger. So I think it needs a kind of top-down coordination, respecting what's already there and working with it, but also kind of oiling the wheels and bringing people together to make it happen.
I do think also we need sector-specific leadership still. So, for example, the role that UK sport play in defining which are the right events for this nation to host and for each of the respective sports to be hosted here. That's important to get that sector leadership. But what we don't have at the minute is the integration of the work that the arts and culture and heritage sector are doing alongside that kind of more mature model that the sports sector is doing, then knitted into a really good understanding of, well, what's the existing annual events calendar? Because I think this whole conversation also needs to not just be about which events do we want to attract in and host, which events do we want to create here in the UK that we can export out across the world. So I think it's that balance of each sector needs to be world class, because the UK already has this world class reputation across each of those sectors. But there does need to be better integration and better coordination of where those sectors each shine, what's right in each year, how do we use a UK City of Culture versus a Commonwealth Games versus a World Championships versus a big ceremonial community celebration versus commemoration. All of those things must coexist, and it's the kind of the curation of those that is lacking at this time.
Okay, so I mean, sport's a good example of where you've got the national coordinating body, I guess. Who else needs to be involved in developing the strategy, the UK major event strategy?
I would suggest that Arts Council and Visit Britain need to be involved in that. You know, I think again the fact that sport are really ahead of this in the way that they work and the way that they work, you know, across the country. There isn't the same body at all for cultural events or anything like that to grow those. There's just not. And then you end up kind of inventing them, which is the right thing to do from your own place. But then you go kind of asking for resources and asking for, you know, and it becomes about that rather than about a kind of strategic view above that then feeds into place. And I think that point about Liverpool and Manchester is really interesting, because if you're an international visitor, they're 35 miles apart. And the next kind of stage probably of our development as regions is how we work across those to kind of really create that powerhouse of events between those two places in the northwest. But there's similar examples for that across the whole country. But I think it's hard, isn't it, because you've got all this ambition coming up now, which is brilliant from all the devolved authorities, and that is exactly what should happen. And it does need that, I think, kind of coordination by government without being done to as well, which I think is really important, because you've got that ambition in place and you want that spirit of place, don't you? You don't want it all just to be, you know, copycat events that are everywhere.
And critical to that success will also be, you know, particularly looking at areas where the devolved administrations and national agencies within those administrations are leading the way. You know, if you think of, you know, there's amazing work that Arts Council England do, but the work of Creative Scotland, the work of Creative Wales, you look at particularly, I think, how the lottery family has so many touch points across so many different other statutory agencies and partners and programmes and initiatives. We definitely felt when we were working with Spirit of 2012, because they were pan-UK but also very place-based, they had very good understanding of what worked in different parts of the UK. And I think it's going to be really critical that this, whilst this needs to have UK-wide vision, it isn't top-down imposed vision. It is built from local place, and it's built with a sense of Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and England coming together in one cohesive vision, even though there may be different strengths and different aspects that each part of the country wishes to kind of lean into and focus on.
I'm struggling slightly to understand how you bring these two things together, because you all three of you, I think, have talked about the ideas coming up from the bottom, but also you need the coordination from the top. So, I mean, in practical terms, how does that work? You need some sort of governmental body to try and bring all these people together. I mean, I suppose I'm trying to understand what the powers this body has, and who is responsible for setting out the vision and kind of stopping the rows that might happen between individual authorities or organisations who want to bid.
I think there's probably a maturity now out there where there isn't. There isn't as many rows to say. I think the mayors are very collegiate across the country, and I think there's a real energy there that I'm really excited about. So I think that willingness to understand the place within the mayoral thing is really exciting. I think the way that government works, I think where government comes in really well for us, and I really noticed it during the event research programme that we did during COVID, but also during Eurovision, is when they open doors. And their convening power is much bigger than either regions, mayors, councils, or whatever. When government ask people to come to a meeting, they sort of turn up. So during Eurovision, all the ALBs were given 6 months to work with us. They did it willingly, but it was led by government, and it was led very strongly by government that this has got to be a success for the UK as well as for Liverpool, because we're doing it on behalf of Ukraine. So I think that convening power that government brings and DCMS can bring when there's a deadline, because there always is really extraordinary. And I found the difference with event research programme and Eurovision than the ones that we do by ourselves. There's a real marked difference. So I think that convening power of government is really important. Yeah.
We shouldn't be afraid as well of the role that a visionary leader will play in the course of this. In events, there is often a group of people who are leading that event. Their day job is to bring the police, statutory agencies, arts, culture, heritage, sport, the business sector around the table. So whilst there is an important role for government, there is also an important role for independent voice, the sector, the ability to kind of have some bold, brave ambition that people are uniting behind. I think one of the things we've all found across the major events we've worked on is if there is a compelling vision, and if there is also people invested in telling that vision and bringing people together, it's quite easy to get that collaboration. It's when that vision is lacking and when that leadership is lacking that the events can't thrive and the infighting begins.
Okay. In terms of that vision, so should it be a government coming in and saying, well, for example, in Manchester, we many years ago thought, well, what we need to do is revitalise East Manchester, and the Commonwealth Games was the start of that, and it's been massively successful, and that was part of a kind of a wider regeneration vision. So should the government come and say, well, we've got a problem in former industrial communities or the east of England or wherever, and say, right, we want to focus all the national event strategy on a piece of work like that? No. Okay. I suspected the answer was going to be no. So
I think it needs to set the UK context and the UK vision. How do we as a country want to use the incredible expertise and passion that we have and creativity to tell the story, to unite communities? At the end of the day, events are about people and communities and bringing people together. And there is a real willingness to do that better and more strategically across the UK. So I think it isn't about imposing. It isn't about... UK Sport, under the Gold framework, will look at which locations are best placed to deliver which events that they're bringing. So there's always got to be a discussion and a trade-off around priorities and where events go to. But I don't think it needs to be directed in the way that you've said, Helen.
I think just one of the worst things that can happen is if you just do an event. Yeah. So I think that is absolutely not what we should be talking about. The whole point about events is that they are a highlight of a really great cultural and artistic programme that goes on in the city or the place all the time. When they stand alone, they become, I think, a bit vacuous. So I think in Liverpool, every 2 years, we do something major and really big and hopefully, and international. But we also support, as a city council, we support our cultural organisations well and properly, and always have done over the last 15 years. And I think without that, for me, is the golden thread. It's how you work with artists, and you support artists properly in a place. And then sometimes you bring in these just incredible things that bring international attention there. But without that kind of through line, events are just lovely, something that comes and goes and everyone goes, that was great, and moves on. They're not part of the lifeblood of a place.
I think it's also about having that long-term look at impact. At the moment, we are viewing events very singularly. Even, Cities of Culture has got better with this, but even Cities of Culture have been viewed singularly, looking at the evidence, what works across the piece, how can they really be part of the fabric of how we bring our communities together is really important. How do we take that? No events really are going back and doing proper evaluation 10 years afterwards. Now we can... but we don't have enough of that. So we can do that through looking at place and looking at the impact on place, but we're not doing it strategically enough to look at how we deliver across the country.
Thank you. Let's move to our own champion of Liverpool, Annalise.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks very much for coming in. And Claire, what you said before about culture being at the heart of the regeneration of the city is absolutely not right. I know that as a Liverpool girl, how 2008 European City of Culture completely transformed the city that I grew up in and brought it back to its former glory, and its greatness was back, and that legacy lives on. I did want to talk a bit about the Eurovision, which was an absolutely tremendous success and something that we're still proud of in the city, but that was done under huge time pressure. Like, it was phenomenal what was done. So what was the secret? How did you do that?
I think we've learned. So I've been in Liverpool for 20 years. You know, I did European Capital of Culture, and I think what Eurovision gave us the opportunity to is everything we'd learned over 20 years we could put into practice in for that. And it was just, we were just determined to win it. It was a competition, but when we did, I think that the key thing for me is that it's kind of what I said earlier. There were 3 departments that worked together on it. There was the BBC, extraordinary show, us, and then there was national government. And we worked equally, but we stayed in our own lane. And I will say that, and for me, it is, people who've worked on major events, there wasn't a crossword in those 6 months. It was actually, we're delivering it on behalf of Ukraine. We're going to do the best thing. We're going to make the UK shine in this place, and we're going to make the city shine. And I think what we did is that, again, it's going back to your point about when you do events properly, you don't just do the event. So it would have been very easy for us, at that particular point in time to go, right, okay, the BBC will just come in, it'll be great. They do brilliant things, it'll be fine. But we worked very much on making it as big as we could. Community programme, education programme, involving everyone across the city region. City centre was full every single day for the 9 days of the village. And even if you didn't like Eurovision, people would come into the city and felt it, and you felt it through, a second you got off at Lime Street. And I think for me that's the key. We never do events that are just, let's bring the show in and go. Our events always connect with communities, always connect with education. And I always thought that Eurovision had always done that, so it wasn't new to us, but they hadn't. That was a first for that particular major event. They hadn't ever worked like that before. And that's what brought the joy, because if you've got a kid coming home to you, from school going, we've just done this workshop with Ukrainian kids, and, we're all making kites, and we're flying kites across 2 cities at one time, and then they see the show on television that, on the Saturday night. It was just incredible. It was, but we've learned how to do that over 20 years, knowing Liverpool, knowing the spirit of the place, knowing what works. And I think for a major events, national strategy and national place, it's about how do you tell that story of this place, of the UK. How do you tell that story the way that we've done, hopefully, in Liverpool?
And a colleague's going to ask about community and legacy specifically, but I unfortunately did not get a ticket for the Eurovision. I'm a big fan, so I was moody about it. But obviously I did see all of those events that you were talking about that were around it, how the city was just had that vibrancy, was really full and buzzing. And you did bring the community were part of that. Can you just say a little bit, but not too much, about how you brought them in? I know that you said you had that experience, but for it to be a success, it was a key part of it. I felt, because it wasn't just like you said in that arena on that night. It was spread across the city, and people were part of it.
Yeah, and I think that is the beauty of major events when they're done well, when they touch everybody in that place and everyone wants to be part of it or to go and see it, and that connection is fantastic. I think in Liverpool, you don't need to try very hard, because we've had 20 years of doing major events, so people get it. Someone once said to me, in 2008 with Capital of Culture, once you let the genie out of the box, you can't put it back in, because people suddenly expect that. They expect that of their place. And I think that in Liverpool, and Liverpool, as you know, is very vocal, so if you don't do things right, they kind of tell you, and that's right and proper. But I think people just wanted to be part of it, because we were doing it on behalf of Ukraine. It was Eurovision, it was joyful. So we didn't have to try too hard, but I think that the systems we have in place across Merseyside, they just click in. It's like we have lots of people. We always say we've got lots of people in a box, whether that's emergency services or whether it's teachers or whether it's kind of community workers. And when we get the chance to do a major event, we just open them, they all go, yes, please. And it's not their day job. And I think that's the spirit of when you do events well, but also when you've got the place at the improvement of place at the heart of it and pride in place at the heart of it.
The government have learnt and implemented from the success of Eurovision. How have they taken the success of that? And
yeah, I mean, you see it through Town of Culture and City of Culture, and I think they're two initiatives that you see that through. I think it was a formula that really worked, so I would hope that government, have taken that forward on other major events. And I think the key thing for me was we were left to get on with the stuff that we know well, and the government got on with the stuff that they did well, and that and BBC did, and that was really clear, and it's a really great governance model as well. And then when there were major issues, we had a gold, silver, bronze structure that would just go up, and things would be done at a ministerial level and solved at a ministerial level for that event as well. So it was just a really brilliant experience, and government should be very proud of it, but they should obviously be doing it post Eurovision. It was 2 years ago.
yeah, can I just ask about how it works with the funding and as part of the strategy we were talking about before? Does the way that the funding work around this work, both in terms of how it works on the ground when it's done, but also putting together bids and stuff like this, because it seems like a bit of a chicken and egg where really regeneration happens, but you kind of need the money and things in place for that. Do you know what I mean?
No,
so
I really do.
The local government, the mayor's money, national, and maybe a bit about the tourism levy as well that some cities are bringing in, and what you think about that.
I start with the mid-plastic field.
Whoever.
You've got a different model as well, which is great. So I think for places like ours, it's really hard because you've got to kind of the place has got to want it, so it can't just be you kind of beating on doors saying events are really great. Your politicians have got to really get it, and they get it in Liverpool, which is fantastic. But you have got to put that jigsaw together around funding from combined authorities, from city councils, from Arts Council, and all of that's got to be done during a bidding phase. So that kind of complexity of putting funding together is really tough. And when we did Liverpool, when we were bidding for Eurovision, we had to go through all our committee systems in the chance that we might or might not have got it. We had to sign the contract before, and then government stepped in and government supported it significantly as a national project, but they hadn't stepped in at that point, so we didn't know what budget we'd be working to. So that whole thing about resources is really tough, and that actually having a proper, and that's where Spirit, actually, Ruth, you're there, was fantastic, because they were the first to put their hands up and say, we'll support Eurovision. What do you need? Rather than, this is the hoops you've got to jump through to get it, because we had 6 months. Something very good about doing things in short periods of time. It gives an energy that's different.
It is important to recognise major events do require investment. I guess one of the transformational examples is the Birmingham Commonwealth Games in 2022, £778 million worth of public funding. We're delivering the Commonwealth Games in 2026 for £150 million with not a single penny of public funding going into that. So actually, that is because people wanted to reinvent how the event is delivered and the operating model for that event. Could we do that in Glasgow if there hadn't been that investment in 2014? No, but this is that long-term legacy. This is 12 years later, using public investment that gave us the infrastructure, the skills base, the industry, the strategy, and 12 years later being able to deliver the same high-quality event without costing the taxpayer a penny. Now, that's one of the things that when we get that right, we'll be able to offer that learning to other nations, 73 other nations and territories throughout the Commonwealth, about how you reduce the scale and cost of delivering an event whilst also keeping the quality and focus of the event. So I think there's a lot of things where the UK is actually leading internationally in terms of rethinking about the commercial delivery of events.
Can I just comment on that? I mean, from an event funding perspective, we talk a lot about the funding for the event. Events need funding before to get themselves together. They need flexible developmental funding, as we did with Eurovision, to say what do you need, and then they need funders to come in afterwards. And I think one of the areas that we need much better coordination, and there is a willingness on behalf of funders to come together and do a bit of that, around events is how do we make sure there is funding afterwards for the communities, so that when that inspiration, when that magical moment has happened, there are tangible things for those communities to continue doing that are funded as a result of the event and are part of the whole funding ecosystem. So we mustn't just look at funding of the event. That is really important. We also need to look at the entire life cycle. So how do we fund it before? What happens during the event? And then how do we fund it for a long time after, so that impact can continue to be felt? The only other thing I would say is I feel for event organisers that they are trying to present themselves in the vision of other people's strategies often. And so you have very creative people having to squeeze what they're trying to do into the strategy of an arm's length body. And so anything we can do to coordinate that funding better, to look much more strategically and much more holistically about it, to give the places and the creatives that are delivering the freedom to do it as brilliantly as we know they can, is hugely important.
Thank you. Annalise, Bio.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. So I'll first refer to my statement of interest. So before this place, I sort of worked in sort of the events industry across sort of national and international events, major events as well. So my first question to all of you is, for a second, I understand some of the comments around sort of cross-government sort of support, but if we were to have a cross-government major events team, what policy areas and what departments would be involved, and how would that look? Before you all answer, I know you spoke about the fact that the industry can do this, but I think it's important to point towards sort of things like, Phil, you spoke about sort of like a 20 and 30 year sort of pipeline planning cycle, and so how would you look at that?
I think I'd want to start with making sure we'd got the responsibilities clear between UK government, the devolved administrations and local authorities, so that at the absolute top level of the front door, there is a clear understanding about how those three levels of government interface and interact. I think within UK government, from some of the projects I've delivered that have fallen within UK government's remit, it is clear that DCMS has a leading role to play. And I think the thing that we would all say around the DCMS engagement is it is much better internal integration within DCMS that's needed. I think where we've seen the most impact is taking real clear accountability for a department for a programme of work that supports and amplifies the event. So whether that's working with business and trade on those international programmes, whether that's working with FCDO on soft power, you can't run an event without close integration with UKVI and Home Office. But those accountabilities in respect of specific major events are not clearly set out. You have to go into the department and you have to find the relevant individual and you have to convene. And I think actually if that accountable ownership of major event responsibility was clearer set out departmentally within individual departments, but DCMS was given the agency and ownership to not just convene that group, but activate that group and use that group, move the machinery of major events expertise across government. That's where we'd see a greater pace of delivery, but also that's where we'd see greater value and greater impact.
Okay, thank you. And Ruth, I suppose that points to your sort of, what was the term? I loved it, by the way, better front door.
Yeah. I think it needs a better, more consistent front door. I think it also needs a level of understanding of where the expertise is in delivering the social outcomes that we want events to deliver. We talk a lot, particularly at the moment, around how events can deliver social cohesion. We also talk a lot around well-being. Well, if we're going to do that single, if we had a cross-government team, you would want them to have some expertise or know how to draw on expertise in terms of what's really working in delivering those social outcomes. I think there is also something in that team around measurement and the economic value of events, both in terms of the hard economics, but also the social value that they're delivering, how we look at that over the long term.
Okay, and do you think government can do that in terms of, and this points slightly to that sort of calendar coordination you was talking about, Claire, as well. Do you think we are able, as a government, as a committee, to try and sort of implement that can make those changes?
Yes, I think we've got coordination.
I think you can't forget the creativity in that, because when you're talking about events, we've just done an event strategy analysis in 3 sort of bits really. It's business, you know, it's sporting and it's cultural events. But I think that creativity needs to be at the heart of it as well, because it's where you want to be, and how, again, it goes back to the golden thread point and how you knit that together. Because the danger of having we've got a very established event group within Liverpool City region. We've worked together for years, you know, and that includes all the different services that you would expect to run an event, and that can be mirrored nationally. But actually, at the heart of that is a key belief that events are really important and can tell our story in a national and international stage. And I think if you get that kind of content heart right and the creativity right, then the rest of it kind of will come, because sporting is very organised. UK sport are brilliant, they're really organised. Business also, because of conferences and the work they need to attract internationally. But that cultural part is what tells the story, you know, that tells our story. And I think that's the bit probably for me that is the weakest at the moment from a national perspective.
I think also just, when we think about audiences, when we think about people, when we think about those who will come to the events and enjoy them, you know, we spend our lives in a very sectoral world. We talk about sports events and we talk about cultural events and we talk about business events. Actually, most people want to just do a bit of everything, and most people's lives are interconnected. So it is finding that join between, and I think events are really powerful in the way that they bring joy and hope and optimism and forward-looking, but also harder skills, tourism, economic value, and the coordination of those two things and how they work together, I think, is where we need to look.
Yeah. I know I don't look it, but I spent time in the creative industry, really. So in terms of events, that's where I sort of lived. And so I suppose the question I want to ask, and Claire, you mentioned it around sort of creativity, of course, that needs to be sort of front and centre. And Ruth, you mentioned the point about how sort of producers have to sort of fit through the eye of the needle in many respects when it comes to sort of planning and licensing and things like that, and I've been there. So that's why I'm sort of concerned about how government really does need to be part of this, because ultimately producers and funders have to sort of fit through the legislation that's coming down the road. And if we're talking about a 20 and 30 year pipeline, then government needs to sort of set that framework so that, you know, the creators, if you like, can do their thing.
Yeah, and it needs to be a flexible framework. So what's lacking is that vision. So if government can set what is the vision for how we're going to use events right across the events industry for social good and economic benefit in this country, and then have a flexible framework underneath it for the places and the creatives to do what they do best.
It's been fascinating to kind of reset the dial with this Commonwealth Games, in the sense of, whilst it's not got a single penny of public funding, we started from the premise of we couldn't deliver this without the public sector and government. You know, the resources, the expertise, the knowledge, the industry. But because we're not in that typical funder relationship, we've set the pace. We had a year and a half to put a global sporting event on in the city of Glasgow, and therefore every single day mattered. And actually what we've seen is, whether that's the expertise in Glasgow City Council, whether that's the teams within Scottish Government, or even the teams here in DCMS, you know, we're able to drive our own timetable a bit more, because the event is independent and has agency and has ultimately a deadline that no event deliverer wants to miss. That has definitely reframed that relationship. It's no longer funder, event organiser. We're hosting the event in this nation, in Scotland, in Glasgow, and therefore actually everyone wants it to be a success, but everyone needs to keep pace. And I think that's driven us to a much more innovative space. I think it's meant decisions have been made far, far faster. If you think of previous Commonwealth Games, 6 years it took in 2014 to put the event on. I'm sure the same in Manchester. I know it was 4 in Birmingham. You know, actually everyone needs to change with the pace of the events industry. And I think if we do set out a long-term vision, you know, 20 years in events industry is 100 years in most industries. So I think it does need that rigour and it does need that agility for it to be successful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. But what you all have in common is you come into this world, into the cities that you're organising events with, an enormous amount of expertise and a track record of delivery. So if you're a city that doesn't have that at your disposal, where do you start? You know, where's the sort of the playbook that you can use to sort of figure out what mistakes are, what the bear traps are, how to avoid them, and how to bid and successfully win and successfully deliver a major event, Claire?
I think there's a real... We're working very closely with Southport at the moment, which I'm really excited about, and I think that's where the whole kind of regional kind of thing comes in brilliantly, because they're using the expertise of kind of Culture Liverpool, 20 years of expertise, working with their team, in their events team in Southport, who do brilliant work, have done great stuff. But obviously, after what happened in Southport, there is a real issue around the tourism sector there recovering, from that. So the Sefton Council wanted to do something extraordinary in that area to celebrate the beautiful things that are that town and that coastal town. Yeah. And so this year, we've had the businesses talk to the mayor a year ago. We're delivering from February kind of a major events programme in Southport that will really kind of put a focus on all the light and love that's in that place. And I think what's really interesting about the combined authorities is there's that recognition of support from different places. So with us, my role's combined now. So my role is combined with the City Region Combined Authority and the City Council. So that expertise of the whole team kind of can work with others to kind of grow those brilliant places and those ideas that are coming out from places like Knowsley, and Alice in Wonderland in Holton, and there's just some incredible stuff coming out of the region, but it's using kind of that expertise that is local, but can then leave it. And I think the key thing for me is about, it's fine to kind of go and work with other places, but you've got to leave the expertise there and the growth there. So the learning has got to be in that place, and then they have to take control of it as well. And then that's hopefully what will happen in Southport and in Sefton. And it's been an absolute joy. So I just think there's expertise across the country. The key thing is not to just go in and go, thanks, we're off. It's about leaving that legacy and that skill base within the place.
We need to be better at giving places confidence as well. Yeah. That it's important to fail. It's important to make mistakes. I'm from Hull. The first time we bid for UK City of Culture, we didn't win. So we dusted ourselves off and we bid the second time, and it was an incredible success in 2017. I think, I've certainly experienced going into Glasgow that actually the talent pool that has been nurtured over 30 years is the reason that muscle memory lives and breathes in that city every week of the year, regardless of whether there's a major event happening during those 11 days or it's part of its existing programme. That's enabling us to think not just about the big multi-sport event like a Commonwealth Games, but the innovation that went into the UCI Cycling World Championships, the World Championships we host, the amazing kind of annual programme like Celtic Connections that is on right now, and the work that Glasgow Life and others do to make sure that's continually pushing itself. So I think this is a long-term journey, but actually every place is at a different stage of that journey, and it's okay to have some places that are more experienced with more expertise, other places that they might be bidding for Town of Culture for the first time, and this will be the first big event that they've hosted, and they'll build on that into the future.
I think from a Spirit of 2012 perspective, we've been working in this space, obviously, cross-sectorally, so across sport, arts, community, commemoration for the past 12 years. We are just over a week away from closing because we were set up by the National Lottery as a spend-out trust. But what we've tried to do is brigade all of the learning that we've got with our partners onto our website, which is going to be made freely available for the next 3 years. Loughborough University is taking our archive. There's lots of brilliant material in there, not just from the programmes that we've funded, but case studies of cities like Liverpool, Manchester, Glasgow, how they've done it, where we've taken perhaps more kind of innovative steps. So one of the things we did for the last City of Culture round, because we couldn't invest in the way we've invested before in Bradford, was that we gave some money to some of the places that weren't successful to look at how they could develop their cultural volunteering offer on the basis of their bid. Now that took quite a long time for them to develop because they didn't have the immediate capacity to be able to do that. But, Great Yarmouth now has 1,000 liveried volunteers that go out and volunteer in their cultural and heritage sector. So it's about making the evidence about what can be delivered in places really available, out there for everybody to use, but also that it isn't just about winning the designation or hosting the event that can have the change. The change can come through bidding. It often comes through the vision of local leaders to step up and say, actually, we want to change our place by thinking in this way.
Okay, thank you. Jo?
Thank you, Chair. And you've just spoke a little bit about legacy building for communities. And as a small town in Greater Manchester, an outlying town, we hosted the UEFA Women's Championships in 2022, and I cannot tell you the impact that event had on our small little town, not least because the participation in women's football and all our grassroots community clubs memberships went through the roof. But I want to get to it with the difficulties, if you like, with regards to sort of legacy building and the resource challenges that face organisers. And I think to Claire and to Ruth, how can major events achieve meaningful legacies?
Can I start? I think the first thing I would say is legacy, there is an umbilical link between what you can deliver as a legacy and the success of the event. So you cannot detach, and we've thought long and hard about this relationship between the organisers and those that are left in the place to deliver the legacy, and whether the responsibility for developing that legacy strategy ought to sit with the organising committee who are going to close, or whether it needs to sit locally. But there is this umbilical link between the two. So if London had not been seen to be very successful, we would not have been set up and there wouldn't have been that long-term legacy. So you can't divorce the two. I think from my perspective, one of the critical things is about the governance and accountability. So if you are using, and if we think events can work very well as a pivot point for a place in terms of their change. So rather than it just parachuting in to be a host city, how do you use an event as kind of rocket boosters almost to bring partnerships together, to bring funding to the table, to excite communities, to be a kind of booster on that journey of change. But that needs local partnerships to be developed. It needs local accountability and local governance. It needs funding. Critically, it needs a long-term view on the funding. And, you know, over the past 12 years, I have sat around many tables with event organisers who have said to me, Ruth, I would love you to fund this thing afterwards, but actually what I need you to fund is this thing now. So having a much more coordinated, strategic approach to where are funders best able to fund work to deliver that long-term legacy, and how that really seeds into the long-term vision for the place is important. Women's Euros was brilliant in terms of the game. We also need to recognise, I think, that there is, you know, there will be different legacies delivered by a single sport multi-location event as opposed to a multi-sport single location event, or a cultural event that happens over the course of a year, or a cultural event like Edinburgh that happens year to year to year. So understanding those nuances, the levers they can pull, not getting tempted to think that an event can solve everything, is really important. There are some levers that events can help you pull, there are others it won't. So yes, really, you know, thinking about that relationship between the national and the local, where it sits, but having long-term accountability and funding is important.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've lived the legacy of capital of culture in Liverpool, so I've seen it and I've seen it change. And I think there's 20-year-olds, 18-year-olds now in Liverpool who've only ever grown up knowing the city in that way, and I think that's really incredible. And you feel it, and there's a whole generation who value culture because they've seen it and they've felt it and they've had free events. I think for us it goes back to that point about having a very clear strategy, of funding our cultural sector well and properly, then bringing in brilliance and working with brilliance every 2 years, and kind of really shining a spotlight on the city and making the whole place feel excited about that, whether it is a sporting event or whether it's three ships or whether it's giants walking the streets. All those things create a community of people who've got shared memories over a long period of time. And I think we've talked very much about culture being the rocket fuel for the regeneration of Liverpool. We've had the same story for 20 years, and it's kind of sunk in, and you can see that generational change now, and that's a real privilege to see kids now who are 18 who talk about, you know, who were born in 2008, who've only ever known the place as vibrant and as full and as exciting as it is now. And I think legacy, it's a word that is, I think, a lot overused. But if you look at Liverpool's city region and what we've kind of done there, that's been a series of politicians taking it really seriously, investing in it properly and well, but doing things that are properly of scale, as well as supporting the grassroots communities and the grassroots work that informs that. And I think when you get those two things right, you've got a real sweet spot that brings that place alive, you know, and you feel it now for any of you that have been there recently.
So what role could government do more in supporting legacy benefits?
I think it's about those arm's length bodies as well, and it's about them committing to place in a way where the place has got a strongest voice in that, not the arm's length bodies. And I think that's really clear. You know, we would know what we want to do in our area. We know how to make Liverpool City region work. You know, we live there, our kids grew up there. We know what our audiences want there. And it's about, I think, those arm's length bodies going, okay, how can we support you to achieve your ambitions around place, not sometimes the other way around.
I think it's also about setting the intention that that's what you're going to use the event for. I think if nationally we can set that intention that we want to use events to develop communities, to deliver social outcomes, and measure it really carefully over the long term, I think government could have a great coordinating and ambition role there.
Sorry, just really quickly, the economic benefit is really clear for us. You know, we got that right from the very beginning, from European. Every time we do an event, we measure economic impact. I think the thing that we don't need to do anymore in Liverpool especially is talk about that, because people get that, they get the money it brings in, they feel the visitor economy. Visitor levy will be transformational for the event sector because it means we can plan. You know, we'll have budget to plan in our own place under our own terms. But I think that economic point should be made as well, because it's made a huge difference to us.
And that should be driven by government as well to make that point, because obviously we've got evidence that would suggest that smaller organisations, event organisers, they're not able to, fund the evaluation. So
that should definitely come. I mean, we do that as a city because we know that that's the point where you unlock resources, and we know the economic value of events. You see it, you feel it, and we've got the evidence for it. I think the thing that's really more interesting now, especially around the town of culture and all those other initiatives, is about that emotional regeneration of place and how you feel about somewhere that is really hard. We still haven't cracked, I don't think, how we measure that.
I think, evaluation needs to be funded. There needs to be an expectation that evaluation will be funded. That government can play a role in setting that expectation with the arm's length bodies. We allowed all our projects to spend 10% of their budget on evaluation, encourage them to evaluate from the start, because the critical thing isn't the evaluation, it's using it. How do you use it? How do you make it available? How do you ensure that if you're collecting data, it isn't just to tick a box on a funder's form, but to say, okay, well, who is in the room and actually who isn't in the room? And how are we going to reach them, and what's the change that can happen, and how do we make it better? So it's evaluating, but it's actively using the data. And I think that expectation from government that if we're going to do evaluation around events, it's the active use of it that needs to happen. I think the other thing, just to Claire's point, is we've done 2 sets of polling now, 10 years after London 2012, 10 years after Glasgow 2014. In both cases, 60% of people nationally, so Scotland for Glasgow, UK-wide for London, said that they thought there was still a legacy from those games. 75% of people in the place thought there were. Now, those aren't people on organised legacy programmes. They are people that remember the magic and how it made them feel and how it made them think about their communities and their relationships. So harnessing that magic with some really intentional, well-governed funding against a vision for how you use events is critical.
When I put Lee forward for Town of Culture, I'll be taking them points back. Thank you.
Nice plug, Rupert.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I remember. Actually, the mascots even can cause a legacy, can't they? We've, I think, still got some toys of the 2012, that funny spiky figure. So, yeah, no, thanks for that. I've got some specific ones, actually, for Phil on the finances of it. You were saying that Glasgow's doing it for 150 million with no cost to the public purse. Is that because you've had the 2014 to build on? Because you mentioned Birmingham, their Commonwealth Games cost 778 million, and they're kind of going bankrupt now, although I understand it's not for that reason.
Definitely not connected.
And they're having the European Athletics Championship, so they're obviously coming back for more. Does it help to have had a recent event, and just how did you do it, I guess?
I think there's a global challenge that no nation in the world is saying, please give me a more expensive major event. You only did it when Victoria pulled out, so thank you for taking it on. Absolutely. We've done it because we've been given this mandate for change. Actually, the journey to reformat and reimagine the Commonwealth Games began before Victoria pulled out, because actually there was a desire to see an event that all 74 nations, all continents, all Commonwealth regions could actually have the infrastructure and resources to host. So there's this kind of compelling mandate that by reinventing the event, you're actually making it more inclusive, because more nations will be able to do that upfront investment to put the event on in the future. What we've needed to do is really rethink about the core tenets of how the event is delivered. So our model is much more industry-led. We're using the expertise of the private sector, the supply chain, and we have, compared to a 2,500 strong organising committee, we have 200 people working in an organising company that's got our embedded suppliers baked into our organisation with us. We're using a completely different geographic footprint. It's great to use a broad events programme that is spread across the country, but actually to put cycling on in Birmingham 2022, we had to host it here in London because that was where the velodrome was. Actually, by designing a sport programme that uses this amazing national infrastructure that's in Glasgow as a legacy of 2014, we've been able to put 215 medal events on in the course of an 8-mile space, which radically transforms what you can do from an active travel, a sustainable transport, and a public mobility point of view. It completely changes the nature of temporary infrastructure and the commodities and overlay that you have to put on the back of it. The fact that COP26 was hosted at the SEC campus, some of the technology infrastructure that was put in for COP26 is allowing us to put 6 sports on at the SEC campus over the course of 10 days. So I guess what we're taking is all the kind of investment that was made and going, how do you deliver this event smarter? How do you deliver this event not just in a resized version of what was done before, but a different model that's fit for purpose? And importantly, now that we know that India has been announced as the host for 2030, the centenary games of Commonwealth sport, in formats that Ahmedabad and India can take forward in their design of their event with a 4-year planning cycle, and that connection between the UK and India, between Scotland and India, that will come from these two nations sharing the desire to reimagine what a Commonwealth Games looks like, is going to be incredibly powerful in terms of soft power and international diplomacy. But that couldn't have happened if Manchester hadn't had an incredibly successful 2002. 2014 wasn't a success. Birmingham wasn't a success in 2022. So I think to Ruth's point, the success of an event opens the doors for future innovation and future impact. We as an organising company have set out in our story of change the areas that we believe we can contribute most to the sustained impact of the event. A lot of that is around the environmental footprint of the event. Our focus, given the societal challenges at the minute on community cohesion and bringing those 74 nations worth of athletes together in the city centre to live and experience, but it's a higher quality, it's a more innovative difference. It's not a resized and rescaled.
Do you know what the mascot's going to be?
We have an amazing mascot. She's called Finny. She is a unicorn. She is the national animal of Scotland. Sadly, Clyde, who is the thistle and the mascot for 2014, he is cheering on from the sidelines. So we tried to get him to retire. He hasn't quite retired. He's very much cheering on Team Scotland. And even Borrowby from Gold Coast 2018 popped over for a tour of the city not long ago.
Hysterical. Can I just ask Phil very quickly, in December it was announced that TNT Sport, not the BBC, would be broadcasting the live coverage of the Commonwealth Games. What impact do you think that the lack of free-to-air coverage will have on viewing numbers and the legacy aspect of the Games?
I think it's really clear that both globally but also here in the UK, the way that sports fans consume sport is changing, not just in terms of subscription versus linear, but also, we saw with the Women's Rugby World Cup just how much of the content was consumed by social media and the storytelling of athletes there. What we've had a great commitment from Warner Brothers Discovery was actually to broaden the amount of sport that was visible to more people over the course of the 11 days of the Games. So historically, it might only have been 2 sessions or 3 sessions that were available. What moving to this new solution allows us to do is see more sports on air more of the time through that streaming solution. And clearly, because it is a listed Category B event, it will also have a component of free-to-air as part of it as well. What I think we've got a responsibility to do as event organisers is make sure there are as many ways to access the Games as possible. So yes, that is live and in venue with a ticket, but right now we've got £250,000 of investment going into community projects through our festival fund. We're going to be looking at how do we take the sport out into community spaces, out into green space, the investment in local governing bodies, national governing bodies, to give people, once they've been inspired by seeing something on the field of play, an opportunity to try it for themselves. it's that ecosystem of access and inclusion that's important. And, you know, clearly that free-to-air element is still a fundamental part, and we're lucky that as a Category B event that we've got that protection to be able to make sure that is still safeguarded.
And when Victoria announced that they couldn't host the games, it felt like it was potentially a moment of crisis. It felt like a bit of a pinch point with regard to the future of the games, and, you know, not least because of the question marks about whether the Commonwealth as an organisation is as relevant as it has been in the past. Do you genuinely think that the Commonwealth Games have got a future beyond 2026?
I think the last 2 years have answered the question once and for all around whether this is relevant and whether this is needed. We had 74 nations who gathered in Singapore in 2023 and asked themselves that existential question of, should we exist? And all 74 nations were absolutely committed to seeing this event carry on, so much so that Commonwealth Sport has invested in the reformatting and reimagining of the event. The challenge was, because of the investment that's been made in Scotland and in the UK, there were very few places across the Commonwealth that could put on a Commonwealth Games in this shorter time scale. So I think it's really important that actually, a bit like you were sharing, Claire, in terms of the stories around hosting on behalf of, we see ourselves as doing this on behalf of all 74 nations. And that means that now when we've got a centenary games in India, you know, this is a new era. And that is still important, and part of our programme is looking at the legacy of empire, looking at the colonial past of the Commonwealth, looking at the origins as the Empire Games, but it's doing that and using the space that the event creates to allow 74 nations to have that conversation, communities in a place from those 74 nations to openly discuss it. Yeah. You know, and we're sat here today knowing that just this week 74 nations have told us which athletes they're starting to send, who they're looking to see qualify. So I don't think we'd be in the confident position that 184 days out, there's 3,000 athletes from all over the world coming to Glasgow this summer if this wasn't still wanted by that community. The challenge is how we make sure that has meaningful impact. And I think one of the things that we've been able to do with Commonwealth Sport and the Kingspan Relay is rethink about what social purpose that has. So in partnership with the Royal Commonwealth Society, the relay is committed to collecting 1 million pieces of plastic out of our waterways and oceans across the Commonwealth. Wow. And already we're over halfway there and the relay's not even halfway through. So I think there is also a power when the Commonwealth acts as one, and when those nations focused on their shared interest, sports diplomacy, sustainability, the rights of children and young people, that's when the Commonwealth can be truly great and truly convening and community in what it does.
Can I add something to Phil's? Because, you know, one of the other very innovative things about the Commonwealth Games is it is co-programmed. So it is an inclusive sports event. There is parasport on the programme alongside mainstream sport, and it's really important to hold that for parasport and disability sport. That visibility on the same platform, the inclusiveness and the co-programming is something that I think, you know, the Commonwealth Games leads the way in and can be a model for others. So losing that, I think, would be really dangerous.
We're going to move on to that sort of that kind of inclusivity as well. Finally, I think with you, Cam, aren't we?
If I can ask you to think in the context of how major event organisers ensure that their events work with local communities. Ruth, I was going to ask you if you can give an example to the committee of events that have managed to deliver significant community benefits and how they achieved that.
Yeah, so I think there are lots of events that have delivered community benefit. I think the cities of culture that we've seen over the past 4 iterations have been fantastic at doing that and doing it in different ways, really thinking about how the community can both be involved in it. They've got 365 days, so they've got a year to play with. It's a bit different from a 2-week event that's trying to spark long-term legacy. It gives them the ability to work in a really deep way in communities and have that community engagement. Both in Hull and Coventry, we funded programmes where artists and producers were embedded into communities, so they were embedded in community groups in areas of the city to work very flexibly with residents and with service users, in the case of Coventry, to look at what their response to a city of culture would be, how they want to be included. when they're done well, events can be very inclusive. When they're done badly, they can be exclusive and people can feel very left behind. So thinking about how you can embed producers, creatives into the community infrastructure to give people a voice, but also to get a sense of, we talk a lot about co-production, I think, but bringing in that kind of the vision and the creative from people coming into the city to do something quite different is very impactful. So I would say some of the best long-term legacy we've seen has been through City of Culture. We've been very lucky in Hull that we funded the Hull volunteers right from their pilot programme through to last year. So that kind of 10-year legacy of 2,000 people that put on their uniform and say, how can I help people in Hull, has been really impactful. But that wasn't an intentioned legacy of City of Culture. They didn't know that was going to continue. It just became very successful. So I think intentional planning, involving communities, you need to resource that, but also having a bit of space in legacy planning for the things that have popped up that are more successful than you think and how you take that forward.
Thank you. Phil, would you be so kind as to answer that from your perspective?
I think the investment in that kind of integrated delivery of the event, particularly take this Commonwealth Games, there's been a lot of commentary on the size and scale of the event. Well, this is the largest ever parasport programme in the history of the Commonwealth Games over 96 years, and the first medal on the first day of the Games is para-powerlifting. That right through to what we did in Birmingham, where opening ceremonies are those moments where the whole world is watching. Well, we spent 14 months working with a group of 200 young disabled individuals to feel the confidence they needed to be able to stand in Alexander Stadium in front of the world and perform. So I think you have to be committed to the values of your event. Our event is about inclusion. It does have disability representation front and centre. That needs to be embodied not just in the infrastructure of the event and the important work you do around accessibility. That needs to truly be a lived view of inclusion, and it needs to permeate all different aspects of the event. It's what drives our organisation day to day, is inclusion and making sure that whether that's at a broad level of a Commonwealth, making sure everyone feels they can be seen and safe at this event, right through to that individual who's in one venue on one moment at one point in time, seeing someone who might be a role model for them compete at their absolute optimum, as we know athletes have the incredible power to inspire.
And like I said, the programme that Phil's just mentioned, Critical Mass in Birmingham, was built on learning from London. Yeah. That whilst the opening and closing ceremonies of the Paralympic Games showcased incredible disabled performers, they did not showcase disabled community members, and there needed to be a different way to engage young disabled people in the community to take part. So that isn't just an example of a fantastic legacy programme, it's an example of a fantastic legacy programme that has taken the learning from the last 10 years of delivering major events in the UK, and I'm sure the learning from that will be taken on in Glasgow and other places.
Now that you mention it, I can still remember the brilliant marketing from London 2012 about the Paralympic Games with that fantastic song by Public Enemy, Harder Than You Think. I still remember that now. Claire, I was going to come to you with a slightly different question, if you don't mind, because you've spoken about the legacy of Eurovision. So I was going to ask you, how important is it that inclusion is a key pillar of legacy planning, because you've spoken about the legacy?
I mean, it's been crucial to us. We do it through every kind of event that we do. But I just wanted to pick up on something you said earlier, because I think it's important. Free events are really important, and events that you don't need to spend a load of money to get into, and you can just go and stand with your neighbours on a street and join in something that is a proper, celebration of place, is hugely important. And I worry that because events are getting more and more expensive, that we're getting less and less of those free events that give that access. So we do River of Light, which is a beautiful light festival every year. We have 300,000 people that turn up to it. 40% of those have never been to another cultural event before, and that kind of is their first access of great art and great work and everything. It's free. You're with your friends and your family on the street. And I think we've got to be really careful that when we're talking about events and an event strategy, we're not just talking about those ones that are commercial, successful, and you have to buy a ticket to go to. We've got to start kind of, reclaiming our streets and our towns and our parks and allowing these free events to happen really well with great quality, because at the end of the day you can do as much inclusion work as you want. You can do great community projects, you can do great education projects. If that event isn't of the best quality and you get that moment of that moment when you remember the song or the fireworks go up, or that just moment of collective joy, there's no point. And I think we're in danger with those big free events of them becoming commercialised to such an extent that you have to have money to be able to get through the door to do them. And I think that would be disastrous.
Because to be inclusive, that's got to incorporate socioeconomic.
It's absolutely got to. People have got to be able to experience. They've got just as right. They all pay council taxes. You've got just as right to be there.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all so much for appearing in front of us today. If there's any further comments or thoughts that you have, could you just drop us a note so we can make sure that we can include them in our final recommendations. But we're really grateful for all your time. We're now going to take a short break while we gather our next panel of witnesses. Thank you. Second panel today by three more witnesses who are involved in some really successful major events that take place both in the UK and overseas. We've got Jason Barrett, who's the Chief Executive of the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo. We've got Adrian Lambert, who's the Chief Operating Officer of the Hay Festival. And we've got Major General Simon Brooks-Ward, who is the Chairman of H-Power Group, who, among other things, have the Royal Windsor Horse Show. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us. Jason, I'm going to kick off the questioning with you, but this is something that I'm going to come to everybody with. We've heard about some of the reach of major events in our first panel, about the amazing opportunity that they hold for things like soft power, international relations, trade, etc., etc. How would you think the government could better integrate some of our major events, both at home and overseas, into things like trade missions, export campaigns, that sort of thing?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. I think, firstly, I think it's about awareness and the great things that all these events do and where they also on the side of a major events, and I can speak to the tattoo, it's about understanding where the priorities are for UK government, whether it be trade, whether it be certainly our great partners at the MOD and what their defense engagement priorities are. So where we're going, and many of you may be aware, we're going to Australia and New Zealand just in a mere matter of weeks. We were there in 16, there in 19, and now going back. And so with that, then it is about what can we do as a platform. We pride ourselves on being an engagement platform, one of the better engagement platforms, I think, for the UK, whether it be at the highest levels of military or as we go abroad, export, I think is the word people are using, then how does government plug into that? Integrate into that. There will be ministerial presence when we're in Australia and New Zealand. There will be meetings held on the back of the tattoo as a platform. We're very proud of that, to be able to provide that engagement platform. I think through the lens of soft power, soft diplomacy, it is learning about where those priorities are. And when we learn about those priorities, then we can also begin to integrate that into our strategy to internationalize, grow, diversify. So I think I'll pause there, but I think that's certainly the start of it, is that level of awareness and prioritization.
Simon, how can the government better integrate major events into things like trade missions, export campaigns, and should they be trying to fit major events into part of their wider policy priorities?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, a declaration of interest is that I am bottom line driven. So I go to places where I think I can feed mouths within my business, and also to export our products. So that comes with it. But I will give you the golden thread. People are sort of being asked about the golden thread, and I listened to it earlier on, is that actually I've got a good news story. I mean, in the strange life I've lived for the last 36 years, I've been all over the world, from the Cook Islands to Las Vegas to Shanghai, wherever it may be. And there's one thing that comes across consistently, is that we are an exemplar in major events across the world. They trust us. They respect us. We've got credibility before we even enter the room. And that, I think, is a wasted opportunity in some cases. I have been to the Middle East where, France, for instance, has been there before us with a very powerful proposition which is backed by government. And we are there as single operators trying to carve our own way. And I would suggest that, there's two routes to success here. One is on a trade mission, but actually identifying in that trade mission what's important to that nation. It could be a national event coming up in the case of Oman. It could be equestrian in the Middle East. It could be the military in New Zealand, Australia. What's important to them, and identifying within that trade mission who might be useful in developing that soft power, but also that export potential. And the final thing I would make is that we're not just exporting or trying to export an event. And I give two examples. We're looking at Azerbaijan, funny enough, who looked at us for Royal Windsor Horse Show, where we run an event based on our London International Horse Show in Hong Kong, starting in 2 weeks' time. So we are exporting not only a brand, but we are also giving our IP and also suppliers, contractors that we're taking from the UK, because basically they're trusted. We know that they can deliver. And when we go there, we want to be able to deliver so that the next time it's even better. So I think I probably hit it there, but I think the FCDO is really important. I'm going to Baku in a week and a half's time. The ambassador doesn't even know I'm there. And yes, I'm going into the President's office to deliver a proposal. So, there's certainly a disconnect between our government and actually independent operators like myself.
For events like yours, where you're running events overseas, but also in the UK, but in your UK events, you're bringing, in some cases, performers from overseas to take part. So there's a sort of there's a double opportunity there, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. I mean, you know, I'm not exporting the military to two. I'm just exporting a format and a concept and a product. But it's a trusted one here, so they think it'll be trusted there. I mean, I also think that, you know, we need to view it in a wider context. It's not just about sporting culture. It's about delivering national events for them. And it always should involve, in my opinion, in the criteria, either head of government, senior government, or head of state. And I think, you know, with that patronage and that foresight, I think we could really make some differences.
Adrian, same sort of group of questions to you. You know, how can government better integrate major events into trade missions, export campaigns? Whether they should be trying to fit major events into wider policy priorities? How can they use you better?
Yeah. I guess we operate slightly differently to the models that the guys have been talking about. And we have that credibility in which Hay Festival now we operate in across the world, particularly in South America and Central America, Europe. So we have festivals in Colombia, primarily in Spain. We've worked in Lviv recently as well, in Nairobi, in all places. But I guess all those festivals have been built with local representatives in those particular communities. So it's less of us being a franchise. We're not a franchise model. Each of those particular festivals has its own foundation, which is responsible, its own board responsible for that particular festival. We go to countries or places where we feel that our model, what we want to say, how we want to represent local authors, local democracy can be best used, and also ensuring that there isn't a model already in place that we're going to be seen to be kind of overtaking. It's certainly not. It's not something that. You know, we're not going somewhere, we're not exporting ourselves in a particular way that might be seen to gain necessarily create a profit necessarily, although each festival has to be sustainable under its own means. We're working really hand in hand with local representatives, be it municipal, regional or national in each of those particular countries to create those particular festivals. That's not to say, obviously, that in terms of soft power and what we do, because of the nature of those festivals. I mean, Colombia, the one in Cartagena is at the end of this month, the 11-day festival. And we have festivals in Medellin and Bogota, which have been going for 20 years now and started when Colombia was a very, very different country. Have been absolutely vital in promoting democracy and cultural voice and literacy and literature throughout those countries, and particularly throughout some more impoverished communities in those particular cities. And to that end, we've worked with the British Council quite a lot, so they're one of our partners in our international festivals. We've worked with other brands. I think one time we worked with a great British brand that existed, and they kind of branded part of our festivals. And we've worked with Visit Wales, who've supported our work and use it as an opportunity to talk about the festival. I mean, what's quite interesting from our perspective, we're a festival that's based in Hay and Wye, on the we're a Welsh festival based on the English-Welsh borders. The festivals now, the Hay festivals in Colombia, Mexico, they don't know about Hay and Wye. They just think it's Hay Festival Colombia. As far as they're concerned, their identity is completely sold in that, and they haven't really heard of Hay and Wye or Wales. They don't know this. These festivals grew out of this now 40-year-old festival. They believe their festival is Hay Festival, so their identities are really, really kind of solidly built in that way. So we have that slightly different kind of relationship with those particular communities, which is one that's nurtured through community outreach and programming and all sorts of different things. But as I say, in terms of the soft power of democracy and what we do and the people who come to speak in those particular events across the world, there is a lot that can be done. You know, and obviously, ministers and various ministers have been to Hay in the past to talk and all sorts of things.
Does that feel like if this is a fantastic British export to a lot of parts of South America, and I was in Colombia last year, I think they've got an outstanding British Council in Colombia. They really do deliver, huge bang for the buck. But does that feel like a missed opportunity if it's a iconic British festival that's not being even recognised as
probably quite likely, and probably the international Christina, who's the international director, will probably have more to say about that than I can. But yes, I would think so. Actually, I mean, I think there's certainly. I was lucky enough to be in Colombia last January, and first time. packed-out audiences in each of the venues across that city was amazing. It's a very different model, again, what we have to the UK model. We have to be quite a commercial model. Their models are more particularly focused on sponsorship and trusts and foundations, and so therefore the ticket prices are kept incredibly low because of the nature, again, of trying to engage the local population and get into events that they probably wouldn't ordinarily come to. But certainly, I think that in terms of Hayes' identity within those particular cities, and in Spain we won the Princess Asturias Prize, which is one of the biggest Spanish cultural prizes of the country. They're huge, yes, and I think there probably is more that probably could be done alongside those. Yeah.
Jo.
Thank you, Chair. Adrian, this is to you. So Claire McColgan from the first panel, she told us how they collaborate very closely with other city regions in terms of planning on their events. So how could festivals better support one another and share information that's needed?
It's today in Birmingham, and again there's probably about 60 or 70 delegates who are representing lots of different festivals from across the UK, and some very interesting topics, particular ones currently which we faced a couple of years ago in Hay about nature of sponsorship and corporate sponsorship, and what happens when things go wrong with that particularly, or suddenly concerns get raised about a particular sponsor and your festival becomes under a very, very tight spotlight. How do you react to that as an organisation when you're having to deal with that, particularly in the throes of a festival? And the Factory International have created a really brilliant new document to kind of address those, not only for the organisations but also the staff who work in those organisations who are perhaps feeling conflicted about some of the we've seen with Adelaide Festival, really, and Adelaide got shut down 2 weeks ago because the board of Adelaide Festival disinvited a Palestinian author. Yes. And so therefore within days the festival had completely shut down, and that was a board decision. That wasn't a decision of the director, I hasten to add. So there are lots of kind of lessons, very practical lessons like that, which are sort of unfortunate things we having to I think address more and more, but can be shared amongst organisations. We were also talking about actually how we work with universities and partners. That can be a key part of our offer, and certainly a key part of how we work with young people and draw young people to our festivals as well. And it's a very complex area. Universities are very big beasts, and trying to get in touch with them and trying to draw out and offer opportunities to their young people and their graduates can actually be very, very difficult. So we're looking at different ways of doing that. There are probably also some more practical ways in which there might be buying power in terms of infrastructure, because infrastructure over the last 5 years has increased by about 20% or more. So you want to put a marquee up, it's the prices are increasing, every year on year, and there might be ways in which I think that if you've talked to other festivals who perhaps want to go and talk to a supplier about seating, marquees, flooring, power, that perhaps if you came together and said, look, if we can guarantee that these festivals will use your services, can we kind of try and create some kind of cheaper deal between us to allow people to be able to use this thing and share it between ourselves? So I think some very practical things like that. And then, in terms of programming, sometimes we've certainly shared, when we've brought people over, especially internationally, we've shared those speakers with other festivals to cover the cost of bringing people, which happens probably a bit less than it used to now, to be honest. But
how do you stop events from clashing with each other? Yeah,
it's a good question. We have an event that clashes with us massively in our really. I think everyone seems to kind of like go, well, you're on now, and we'll be on next, a little bit. Hayes been going for 40 years, operating in that kind of late May bank holiday time. But obviously, over that 40-year period, there's been a proliferation of hundreds of festivals, some which kind of are, getting quite close to where we are. We're quite lucky because we have now quite an established brand and an audience who want to come to us. But there are certain things, I guess, we know. We'll look at the calendar and you'll think, well, don't do the end of August because Edinburgh's on. Don't do October because that's Cheltenham. Don't do that because that's...
It's just muscle memory.
Yeah, partly, I think, a little bit. And,
who do you think should lead on it to coordinate?
Well, yeah, I mean, BAFA are interesting. There's also the Association of Independent Festivals, so which is another really kind of very prominent, very active organisation who are representing lots of festivals, because quite a bit of a beast. We don't feel like it, but you're a bit of a beast in that world, where some people are going along and they've got a one-day festival with a few hundred people going along, and it's so the demands on you and how you're perceiving your business are very, very different. The work that BAFA's been doing, they've been going for 20 odd years now. I mean, again, as an association, an independent body which can perhaps kind of cultivate that and lead on those sorts of things, they certainly could potentially perhaps do something like that. Obviously, DCMS itself, who we've worked closely with over the past 18 months, and they've supported us fantastically well with our international stuff. Again, there might be something to those guys. Again, we don't at the moment receive any core funding from any national funding body, so Arts Council Wales or Arts Council England. We receive money from Arts Council Wales, but only for projects rather than for the festival itself. And we get some money from Arts Council England, but that's for projects and not for the festival itself. There might be something in both those organisations being able to think about how they work with festivals. I mean, again, festivals had quite a weird time in the sense that for a certain period, about 5 or 10 years ago, they weren't even funded by Arts Council Wales, for example. It wasn't an art form that was funded and deemed to be fund-worthy by Arts Council Wales. So you have to kind of navigate what you do in order to kind of draw down that particular.
From pressure groups on cancelling one of the guests that was coming to speak to them. Is that becoming an increasing problem for events like yours? We've had it recently in Colombia, where we have, and terrible now, her name drifts out of my mind, of course, but the opposition leader in Venezuela, who received the Nobel Peace Prize, she's appearing at our festival in Colombia, albeit digitally. Now, when that was first announced, we had Colombian artists pull out of the festival because they felt she was a tool of American imperialism. But we kept her in the programme. Now, since that moment, the world has changed again, where far be it from her being snuck out of Venezuela, she's now walking into the White House and giving President Trump her Nobel Peace Prize. So I'm not quite sure what effect that might have had on some other people going to the festival in Colombia, particularly after the things that were said about Colombia as well. They are things that I think more and more we're going to hear about. And we were on the end of that 2 years ago with Baillie Gifford, when Baillie Gifford, who were a funder of the festival, and not only ourselves, but also Cheltenham, Edinburgh, Bradford, Wimbledon, and had been for a very long time, came under fire from fossil-free books, because they said they were investing the money they have into industries which can perpetuate the oil industry. That quickly turned very quickly from fossil-free books and that into an Israel-Gaza situation. And they then wrote to every author, every speaker coming to the Hay Festival, asking them to withdraw. So we had artists quickly withdrawing on that basis, and we had to make a decision very, very quickly, but that would we turn down the money they had allocated for us. We actually hadn't received it, ironically, at the time, but otherwise, really, the festival was facing a very, very dark future very, very quickly. And so I think those questions will get asked more. I think I can, perceive, us coming under fire for various different things. People, again, it's going back to the stuff that Factory have delivered. Obviously, politically at the moment, the world's a very challenging place, and obviously people are getting fired up for all sorts of different reasons in lots of different ways, in very divisive ways as well, which we're seeing through social media platforms. And we have to be alive to that as festivals, not only for the people who are coming, but also for your own staff and for the artists. So they're all going to bring a different attitude towards that. So I think, unfortunately, it's something we will
facing kind of year on year. And to that end, actually, when we contract our artists now, from what we went through, we've given our artists this kind of our own speakers policy on where we are as a charity, because we are a charity, and asking them to adhere to that and understand why, we obviously look, when we take any funds from anybody, from an individual or a business, it goes through a very rigorous process. But as a charity as well, we are expected to take funds in order to enable us to exist to do what we do. But I think it is unfortunately going to be another kind of common occurrence, really.
Yeah. Just because we are in a world where we kind of would rather cancel people who have alternative views to us rather than hear them out. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can I pick up on one other thing you said? Sorry, I'm not nitpicking.
No, sure.
You said that you've got a lot of support from DCMS, that they, they were supportive. But how joined up is government? How much support and interest do you get from other government departments? For example, it's the National Year of Reading.
Yeah.
I mean, so how much communication have you had from the Department of Education? You're probably the most iconic British literary festival. I mean, to how much extent do you have that?
We didn't get any really communication from the Department of Education. I think the first we kind of knew about it probably was through when it was when it was announced as a National Year of Reading, and obviously the programme is being delivered via the National Literary Trust, who we're very much in contact with, and with Jonathan, who leads that, and so we're talking to the NLT about how we can play a kind of really important part in that, because you're absolutely right in some respects. And these things can happen sometimes year on year. There will be a national year, perhaps, of something else coming up. But there are organisations like us and like many other arts organisations, cultural organisations, who are working in these sectors year on year, week on week, year on year, in communities and delivering this kind of work. So I think when those ideas get developed, it's certainly a thinking, who should we be talking to bring into the discussions about that, and perhaps how they can help develop it and help shape it and help deliver it, would be a very beneficial thing, because I think it kind of tends to happen.
That's that golden thread we heard about before, how you can maximise, there's this sum is greater than its parts, if everyone's working collaboratively to an aim and ambition, it seems to deliver so much more. Thank you.
Yes.
Let's move to Damien, please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to come back to the projection of Britain abroad and soft power and ask Jason and Simon about this. So it's a question actually that comes up with lots of sectors that this committee covers, whether it's general have you. And that is, everyone's got a great story to tell about soft power until you say, okay, so how do you measure it?
Yes, I can start. So we measure it every year. It comes down to our Royal Gallery, which others have said, and we welcome this, is one of the best engagement platforms annually. The MOD has said that, and others. And so on any given night, there will be, last year we can point to, when you hear, so the highest level of military leadership, heads of service, there's 238 stars that were in the Royal Gallery last year. There was 8 ambassadors there last year. There were 6 ministers that visited. There were, dozens of MPs. So in some ways, and then you just sort of extend that, royal family, etc. Then you're able to say, okay, if you are coalescing that level of influence, then what can be made of that? Yeah, and so it's with that. Now I heard your question earlier, and I enjoyed that, because I think there's a lot of theory around soft power, but it really is about the how. Yeah, the what is certainly self-evident, but the how is how we do that, and we've engaged in that. I spoke to it a little bit earlier. Is if someone were to tell me what the defence engagement priorities are for the UK in the next 3 to 5 years, that would be helpful. And then we would look at that, and we would cross-reference that with what are the tattoos, commercial, artistic, creative objective over the next 3 to 5 years, and where they intersect, there's the opportunity, isn't it? So let's say it's Japan. In this instance here, we're interested in going out and finding a Japanese act to create that diversity of artistic and creative construct for the tattoo. It just happens to be maybe that's a DBT trade priority, or whatever the case may be, and now all of a sudden we find the win-win in that. So it is those conversations at which we can do that you can activate which I think is important. Activate soft power and soft diplomacy and not just talk about it.
Brilliant, thank you. And Simon, a slightly different part of the sector, as it were. Do you find it's possible to, first of all, for your own internal measurements, to assess soft power, but also to persuade others, particularly parts of government, that you may want help and support from?
I'll be quite honest. If soft power means that our events are supported year on, means you've succeeded slightly in developing those relationships, not just with you but with other people as well. And I have to be very careful here, so I'm going to just lay it on the line that I can't talk about some elements of the soft power that I'd like to in this committee. But what I would say from a government perspective is that if you, for instance, phoned up or got an input from our ambassador representing us in the country where we're delivering soft power, to get a report back to say how important that is, I think that one or two, I could give you signals here, but I mean, one or two of our ambassadors certainly would be writing back saying, Royal Windsor Horse Show is extremely important in our relationship with X, Y, and Z. So I think they are a very good barometer. Do I measure it? I've told you how I measure it because I'm interested in that. But I'm also interested in the fact that I'm not completely commercial about this. I enjoy the fact that people respect our country, our values, and everything else that I hear, because of the platform that we provide for certain individuals and countries within our events. And I think that's extremely important. You know, we have, and I come back to it, we have such a massive reputation out there that we do our best to destroy it, but actually people out there that I speak to and know in certain places are extremely fond and view this country as being the exemplar still.
Would I be right in interpreting that the three of you have three different government sponsoring departments? So yours would be DCMS, yours
I'm not sure my
FCDO and MOD?
I'm not sure where mine would lie. I mean, it would be a mixture between DCMS and the FC.
So, I mean, the question I was going to come on to is, I think so the tattoo is sort of up there with the Farnborough Air Show and stuff as it says a very special and particular place in the kind of military ecosystem.
It is. Not, if I could just interject. Yes, absolutely. And that for 75 years, the military's in our name. But we also, trade missions to Mumbai. Performers went over there in support of DBT. We work with the Great Campaign, and we're in Osaka at the World Expo. So we're definitely cross-governmental. But yes, of course, in our legacy and our history with our proud partners at the MOD.
So the question I really wanted to come on to was who does that coordination across government and how good? It's not a department with a huge amount of heft, or in the scheme of things, it's all these budgets are big budgets, but in the scheme of things, not that big a budget compared to others. Is DCMS well placed to be able to coordinate on things like visas and security and all the other things that come together for a big international event?
I come about it another way, and just to take it away from a government department. And by the way, I'm treading on no knowledge or little knowledge of how that interoperability works. But I would say that if I was government, I'd look at major events and understand the criteria that is applied to that major events, either for UK PLC or for exporting the brands. Come up with a criteria. It could be Crufts, it could be Chelsea Flower Show, it could be Royal Edinburgh Literature 2, it could be the Hay Festival. But to put it into a major events portfolio, that we understand then that we can go out when we're into British Council, FCDO, or wherever we may be, or trade missions, and say, do you know what, I think that one would appeal to this, or the IP of anybody sitting around this table and without would appeal onto that trade mission. Now, Where does that belong? I think that's probably the next stage. But I think the first stage is to actually define what we mean by a major event, and where that relates back to the UK PLC and to society, actually, and then come up with a plan. I mean, sorry, just to give you an example, in Bahrain, which is a much more agile environment, small economy, whatever, they've got a major event strategy. It's run through the PM's office. It involves Minister of Finance, Minister of Tourism. They can identify bed nights against events. They have an event schedule, which means that things are cultural, sporting, whatever, not competing. And they produce a very, very coherent plan. Difficult in this country, but I would suggest that's if you start from that basis.
If I could, I think we were very encouraged about 18 months ago to hear about the Soft Power Council. I think that was a great start, and certainly with DCMS and the Foreign Office coming together. There is certainly, and there's been work done, but more to do. That there's the inroads, there's the plug and socket, if you will. There's the start of a strategy that then can cascade down to the likes of our organization. In the UK, and it's with that we promote brand Britain, we promote brand Scotland, and there's a very receptive audience to that.
One final question from me, if I may, to anybody who's got a view to give on it. Came up briefly in the last panel from Claire, talking about the proposed visitor levy, and she said she thought that was a great opportunity for the sector. I just wonder what either indication you've had or your own internal assessment you may have made of whether you anticipate like 100% of the visitor levy going into the visitor economy, and for what sorts of purposes, for marketing, for general destination management, for facilities, for capital, for what? I mean, what have you heard from government?
A little bit, certainly in Edinburgh, it's a very topical issue on many fronts. The first thing, and working with the city very closely on things like this, particularly accommodation, is of sensitivity for everybody who goes to Edinburgh, not least of which performers and festivals that have to house folks during the month of August. But I think that the largest portion of that, and I'm ventriloquizing for the CEO of the City of Edinburgh this time, is to go to maintenance and beautification of a very touristed city that gets worn out year-round, but particularly in the month of August. So we're talking about potholes, we're talking about graffiti, we're talking about cleanliness of streets, we're talking about things like that, which we welcome. That if that's going to be the case, then that can only help all of us. It's double-edged sword for us, and speaking for the other festivals in Edinburgh, because that levy also is applied to performers. And certainly if the Fringe were sitting here, they would speak about how that's affecting them as well. So it's a force for good, but certainly it can have its detracting effects.
Anything to add?
I don't know much about the rest of the UK. I know Wales is introducing obviously a visitor levy and also an accommodation levy as well. Or if you provide accommodation, you have to register. I'm not sure how many people actually know about that in Wales. To be honest, my conversations with accommodation providers is they're quite left in the dark about it, and whether that will apply to people who, during a festival, again, we're in a very, very rural location. We're wholly dependent on local accommodation providers providing accommodation for artists, staff, and audiences, and obviously there are local campsites. Whether people who rent a room in their house for 11 days of the festival will have to register that, I don't know. Whether they will, I really don't know. But that's going to be interesting.
So my key question really is: do you expect it to be hypothecated, and for that to be incremental funding for the visitor economy? So they have to clear up the graffiti now, right? I mean, you may think they could do it better, but someone has to do it. Someone has to fill in the potholes. I guess the question with the visitor levy is this more money that's coming into the sector? We don't know.
Yeah,
we don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Damien. Let's move to Bio, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question for General Simon. So you spoke about sort of the trust, the exemplar, the relationship, the reputation we have as a country. How has that sort of, can you elaborate on that? How has that enabled you to sort of build relationships with key figures really around the world whilst you're sort of running the business? Any other sort of insights?
It's a difficult one, and I don't want to get into personalities, but what I would say is that we are in an industry is just for the rich, wealthy, and the whatever. It covers a massive spectrum because, and Facebook will tell you 7 million people have a like for a horse. So that's quite a sort of wide market. So I want to sort of say that. But where we get into soft power is through individual relationships within countries that actually, I believe, but I then go back to my point, don't take it from me. Relationship. And that could be somewhere in the Middle East or whatever. And outside of the committee session, I'm probably, I could give you an example of that, but I don't want to get into individuals because it's not here to do that. But what I do know is that the power of the horse, in my bit, has a very beneficial effect in connecting people on a soft basis that normally would not talk to each other on a level that's not a sporting or a horse-orientated piece. So I'm being a bit ambiguous. I know that, but
you're going to love my next question then.
I am being very ambiguous, but I absolutely know that the connectors are there. And we work with the FCDO, particularly in Bahrain, as an example. The ambassador there is on my hotline. I know that he values the relationship between Bahrain and the UK. We helped develop that, and it's been a very advantageous relationship, I would suggest, with the UK. But don't take it from me. And that's where I think that government has to have the surety and the confidence in events like ours through your own systems to actually deliver the temperature.
Okay, just for you. So, I suppose my final question is: has government reached out to you to sort of help broker, to enhance, to connect with individuals internationally in terms of forging relationships? And I think I'm answering your question. Should they use organisations such as yours more?
So not initially is that. The second bit to the question is, are we happy to do that? Yes, in certain circumstances. I mean, we have to be aware of commercial and also relationship sensitivities, but actually we're all on the same side, and so therefore that is not an issue. Should government do more to connect with people like me? Yeah, I mean, I don't hear from anybody within the. As I say, the 36 years I've dealt in many different nations, including many different nations in the Middle East. There's an example. I ran the Jordan independence celebrations because we do everything, but we do. If you can run a horse event, you can run any other event, in my opinion. And did I meet the ambassador once? No. And yet King Abdullah was party to that celebrations and how that was going to be run. So it was a sort of. So I think my point being is, I sometimes think that because, and I said it when I first started talking here, that because I'm bottom line and I'm responsible to my people to help give them a salary at the end of the month. Sometimes that in government is I would say sometimes a negative, sometimes a lukewarm type of, I'm sort of almost messy, I'm not, I'm here just for myself, so therefore why should he's only just trying to buy his villa in wherever, and yet at the same time I've got a huge passion for this country. As a sort of general bit gives that. I think there has got to be a sort of cultural attitude shift to people like me, who are there to make a profit at the end of the day because we need to make a profit. Even as we've been talking about, the live event industry is massively more expensive post-COVID than pre-COVID, so it's very much harder to make money nowadays. So I think there's a bit of a cultural shift.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Barrett. Let's move to Vicky, please.
How did you first start exporting your events, and what were the challenges? To whoever wants to go first.
Well, we exported our event to Colombia because Gabriel Garcia Marquez wouldn't leave Colombia, so we took a festival to Colombia, and that was the reason actually it happened. Thank you. And then out of that conversation of wanting to actually platform, one of the world's most famous writers, and certainly for South America, grew a series of conversations from local people in the municipal, and funders got behind. Sort of the idea of a literature festival, people talking about books and ideas, didn't really exist. So it got supported, and actually some of the people who supported it then are still supporting it now, 20 years on. So, and we often get people come to our festival in Wales and then ask us if they can have one, which is kind of bizarre. So we had these conversations. I've had 2 meetings with Korean delegates who've come to Hay, about 20 or 30 people from South Korea, which has been really interesting, and they're really fascinated in how it works and want to know everything about how they could basically construct this in different regions of South Korea. So we often get invites from different kind of countries to want a festival, but we'll have conversations with people. But certainly, as I said before, really those conversations are based on how we feel the need of the country as to what we do and how we're going to do it, and making sure that we'd always retain editorial control over what happens there, and ensuring that the platform remains free and open to a whole diverse range of voices, because that's what we do. So it's for us, it's making sure that the actual relationship that you create, is one that actually supports our own mission and values as an organisation from the off, really.
And what have the challenges been?
I guess many and varied. I mean, partly, it is funding. It is making sure you do get the funds to support that. Certainly, and each country will have its own different challenges in terms of, as I say, the models in say South America are very different to models that we operate in the UK. It's less commercial. You can't charge ticket prices that we have to charge in order to make sure that we're sustainable in Colombia, because of the nature of the context of the country and the economy. So it is ensuring that obviously you draw in sponsorship from all different kind of sources, and obviously depending on the country and its economy, they're very different to a UK economy. So in Peru, you might be having to talk to some kind of corporations which you perhaps wouldn't talk to if they're a UK-based corporation, but you would do in Peru because it's one of the main industries. So there's those, and then in certain countries, obviously, security is a really important thing we have to deal with as well and think about, and the practicalities, the resources behind it, the infrastructure behind any kind of festival. Most of the festivals we operate internationally take place in venues around cities rather than in Hay. It's a tented greenfield site. So but again, each of those brings its own different kind of challenges, really.
For the tattoo, we've been doing it for on and off for several decades. We're looking strategically to see how we can make that more repeatable, more programmable going forward. The challenges are, I think, there's several, but I think twofold come to mind. Like General Simon said, we are an entirely commercial organization. We are a charity. We gain no subsidy whatsoever. We gave £1.5 million last year to charity, this year to charity, for record setting for us. And so what we do to go abroad is to make more money, to give money away. Saying that, it's the commercial viability that is challenging. We've got to get bums in seats, and we do that through promoters. And so promoter relationships are critical and key, and those can be challenging when going abroad. You're taking something that you own every single cobblestone and brick in Edinburgh, making the tattoo in its entirety, and now you go abroad and have to partner with somebody to do that, and that can present some challenges, but ones at which that if we want to grow, internationalize, diversify, we're gonna need to do, and we are doing that in Australia and New Zealand. So that's the first thing. I think the second one should be fairly self-evident, and that is, the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo, back to the military, that we offer and take UK military bands with us wherever we go. And if we do that more than once a year beyond Edinburgh, that can provide a challenge, I think, to the MOD as far as their forces are diminishing, and can they afford it to come across with us? I think these are the things that we face.
Yeah, well, I'll give two simple answers. How do we get to do it? Reputation. We've been 36 years in the game. I started the company when I was 3, and it's so people come to our events and say, we want a bit of this where we are. Our biggest challenge, I'll give it to you, moving a horse. It's an absolute nightmare. There you go. I think I'll probably sort of leave it at that. My two colleagues have...
You know what? I'm really interested in the logistics of that, actually.
It's a little niche for the purposes of this inquiry, but
Yeah, I mean, if we put them in a stable, put them on the plane, and then transport them to Hong Kong. That's what we're doing in a week's time.
Are there any problems in terms of visas or
Yeah, quarantine is a huge issue, and you have to because you can always transport a horse somewhere, but coming back to the EU is another whole ball game. So you've got we work very closely with the Hong Kong Jockey Club, which is a very good partner to us over in Hong Kong, and we quarantine the horses when they get there, and then we just do quarantine zones. But one challenge, that's it.
So what more could the government do to encourage the exporting of major events, and what other support do you think you might need?
Well, I think the encouragement comes in back to sort of where the shared priorities are. I think in some ways the wish that I think the tattoo would have is that thinking of how events integrate into a strategy, a little bit of the theme of today. And so as they look to whatever those initiatives are abroad, then what I just think everybody's busy, and wherever everybody's horizon is set as far as their planning goes can be different. But it can be viewed a little bit as an afterthought. We're going here for a trade mission, or we're going here for X or Y, and wouldn't it be great if? And then you get the phone call, and you have to come up with pipers, drummers, fiddle players, and dancers with only weeks to push sometimes, which is fine, and we figure that out because it's a benefit to all of us. But if there's a way at which we can plan a bit better, that would be helpful.
Identifying actually the nation that you're going to, working out what they want, whether it be a national commemorative event, an equestrian event, a military event, literally a flower show, whatever it may be, whatever floats their boat, and taking somebody who is an expert within that industry with you would help enormously. Personal interests, either governmental or head of state, very, very personal. So understanding the people that you are actually presenting to would be a start, and then aligning the industry sector alongside it.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think what Simon mentioned before about sort of identifying major events in the UK that are already involved in perhaps working internationally, who they are and where they're working, and understanding what those relationships are would be a kind of key starting point, because then you can draw on that information. And like you say, Simon said that I think people accompanying, if there are trips to certain countries, that people can accompany people to talk about, you know,
being targeted
things. Yeah.
Targeting it.
I think so. That'd be a very good idea.
Thanks, Vicky. Let's move on to Rupa, please.
Yeah, thanks. Quite different events between the three of them, Hey on Why and the horse show and the tattoo. I just wondered, do you think there are practical steps that the UK government could take to promote a UK brand for major event delivery internationally? I mean, the last session, Visit Britain, was mentioned. Could you do reverse branding for all your events?
Well, there might be some examples like the one you just mentioned, but also the Great Campaign, I think, does a bit of that as well. I think there have been examples.
Great Campaign, is that like a sort of quite markable thing for...
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, I've not heard
all of you have worked with them.
Yes.
Yeah, we've all been part of at some stage.
Is it working? I've not heard of it, but I'm not the target market.
It's out of number 10, isn't it? I think that the Great Campaign comes out of. So it is, I think, brand Britain, and to be able to promote that. And I think it can work. I think certainly they were involved in the World Expo, by example. GB Day, by example, there each country gets a day, and certainly we participated in that. So I think there is some intention and strategy behind how to do that. But I think there is more. We're back to sort of the theme that I heard in the first session and now here. This is about coherence. This is about, again, in some ways, very good intentions, but phone calls coming late in planning that you try to support. That what again, we're back to these sort of priorities abroad. Where are those countries? What are those objectives? And then how can we support through major events there? So I think, again, a lot of good people really trying to do good things, but I think bringing some coherence to that would be helpful.
Yeah, codifying what a major event is, and having a coherent platform, as we've said. You know, a small example. It might be nice to walk into Heathrow Airport as a visitor and not just see people, but see events. You know, we've got Wimbledon, we've got this, that, and the other, and we've got I'm a great evangelical person about promoting British events abroad, because I've seen it throughout my life how people react to us when we talk about Great Britain and Northern Ireland and what we do in terms of our events and how we do them. Whether it could be ceremonial, it could be literature and culture, it could be sporting, it doesn't matter. We have got such a significant reputation that we need to build on.
Yeah, just to extend that, I think I said this before, I'll say it quickly, and I think it's important not to lose sight of. I think when it comes to arts and culture, what this country, how this country has represented itself for centuries, is I think higher than as far as a brand goes, whether it's Shakespeare, whether it be movies, whether it be acting, whether it be directing, whether it be all these things. There's something in that, the USP, and how, what distinguishes UK from other countries. I think it is in that field, and then the question is, how does that apply to strategy abroad?
Experience of the Great British Brand was when we were in Spain, and we just got given lots of big banners with Great Britain things on it, and pictures of like House of Parliament and stuff like that to stick up around the place. It's like, why would I put those around in the town in Spain? You know what I mean? It was just a bit weird, really. It was just that it just felt a bit arbitrary, and take a hammer to a nut, really. It's like, well, these are conversations. People are already come to talk about these things. We don't need to talk about them in this just massively kind of obvious cliched way, you know. And again, if you're there trying to be part of the community or town you're working in, what you don't want to be seen is some kind of, again, colonialist imperialist kind of westernized idea of what this is, and coming to bring your ideas to this particular town. And it depends on what kind of relationship you set up in the first place and what you're there to do, of course. But from sometimes in our perspective, what we're there to try and do is obviously work very closely with people from that local town, city, region. British organisation originally, but as I say, to a certain extent, our festivals that exist in these particular countries have become identifiable by themselves, really. But they have fantastic links back to the UK, and we remind people of that all the time at our, at those festivals. And they all exist on our. We sell tickets to them all through our one single website in various different currencies, so everything's driven through that. But I guess it's just ensuring that if we're reminding people of that, how are we doing that? And I think we can do that in probably a bit more kind of subtle or intelligent ways. Really.
And the major theme is, and we've heard this, in a world maybe more divided now than ever, arts and culture bring people together. And then you ask yourself, is the UK uniquely positioned on a global stage to do that? I think the answer is yes. It's really hard to have a row when you're having a good time. You know what I mean? And arts and culture can do that, yeah?
And sport.
And what are the differences between the appetite for these things internationally compared to here? You're Colombia on why?
What's the appetite for?
In Colombia. What are the cultural differences?
Yeah, there's a huge appetite. Yeah, I mean, it's been going 20 years now, and I think
you have to tweak it quite a lot, right? It's not just
I guess it's hit a point now where it's success has driven it, but also we've been doing more recently, which Medellin for a long time you couldn't really go and operate in, but we are now doing a lot of events in Medellin and also in quite a dangerous place in some parts of it, as we know, but in other parts of it not so much. But there is an appetite for that, and I think what we've discovered through that, and also our work, in Spain, but also we have a partnership with BookBunk in Nairobi as well, is the promotion of literature and the growth of literature, and also that a lot of these countries, particularly, South Korea, I think has the highest proportion of young people in the world. I think it's 30%, more young people in South Korea than anywhere else in the world. They're our next audiences, and we've got to try and also engage with those audiences as well. So I think there is an appetite, and certainly think literature and culture, and because perhaps we're just saying that culture's got very divisive. I think what we exist to do is a platform to bring people together. It's about discourse. It is about putting people on stage to talk and share thoughts, ideas, stories, creativity with audiences, and that is absolutely critical.
The strategic bit is that you have your core, whether you be Royal Edinburgh Miniature 2 or a sporting event. And then when you export it, you add in the cultural nuances of that individual nation and sometimes city, so that you're incorporating that within. The core remains the same. The core product is still true to yourself.
Brilliant, thanks. And just, do any of them do the money side better than us? Are there best practice we can learn about sponsorship and those kind of things?
Who can do
the
better?
Places that you export to?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, and we're learning. I mean, for instance, I think there is an aspiration for the tattoo perhaps to do a touring proposition in America per se, right? So that's certainly the commercial side of things in America. It's to me the hardest market to crack as far as where we go. Our brand is familiar in Commonwealth countries. Maybe less so in America, but certainly once you can unlock that on the sponsorship and the commercial side, then that's more lucrative there.
You have to look at the nuances as well of every single country is different, every single place is different, every single culture is different. And there are, if you are, we're all event organisers, so you have your revenue streams and you have your expenditure and whatever. So on your revenue side, it would be different in Hong Kong to London, that sort of area. So you have to adopt a different income policy or income generation than you would do over here. But again, everything's cool.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, we attract an enormous amount of sponsors, different types of sponsors, and trusts and foundations, particularly for our engagement work, education work in those particular countries to support us. Actually getting sponsorship in this country is very difficult, actually, I have to say. Philanthropy is very difficult. I mean, we have a very successful festival, but we have to work extraordinarily hard every year to raise money to put that festival on. You know, we have, you know, sold out events. People, and sometimes I think people, your success sometimes is the thing that can defeat you almost, because people look at you and go, oh, you must be fine. Look at you know, look at those people are coming. That's great. Look at all those names, and you're going, yeah, but you know, it's
a misconception.
It's a misconception. It's really, really difficult. So. Yeah, so tracking down sponsorship, and also because we were saying earlier on, the potential for sponsors to get more fearful about sponsoring events, because if something does happen to that sponsorship, or someone does want to for some reason raise an issue about what they feel about that particular sponsor, it could potentially affect their business. So it's going to probably put some potential sponsors on the back foot a little bit.
Or they don't like the colour of the flowers.
Yes.
That's like the voice of experience. Thanks, Rupert. So, final question from me. So, we are in the business of, you are in the business of events. We are in the business of writing reports to make recommendations to the government about how we can maximise the potential of our major events, our world-class major events, to promote the UK, drive our economy, develop soft power relationships, etc., etc. If there was one recommendation, what would it be, Adrian?
I won't say reduce VAT on tickets, but they should if they reduce VAT on tickets by 10% for charity and non-profit making festivals, we make £200,000 a year. Problem solved. So there is that, but I know that's probably something that's probably a bit pie in the sky.
Yeah.
But I think possibly I think identifying the major events in the country, in the UK that you want to work with, understanding who they are and where they work and how they're constituted, and pulling that information together to allow you more strategically to work with those organisations internationally, really, and understand what it is they're trying to offer, what it is they're trying to achieve. I think that would be a great, fantastic starting point.
There should be some sort of cabinet office grid of what major events are happening globally, and to what extent the other government departments should tie in.
Absolutely, yeah. And if there can be that association with other government departments like education, for example, you were saying earlier on, or outside the DCMS. That'd be fantastic, you know, because there's an awful lot that we do that spreads right across so many different departments, that understanding the breadth and depth of what organisations have to offer.
Now you're asking for the government to stop working in silos. Now you must stop dreaming. Simon.
I think I would put our events industry into sectors. It could be cultural, it could be art, it could be sport, it could be a mixture of, but to put them into sectors. And then to actually identify, and then ask them to identify which countries they would think that this particular product would sit well. And then, after that, make a decision to invite individuals and get their IP into that country to talk about that, because we know where our markets are. I know where the equestrian market is around the world. I know exactly who to go and talk to. But but put it into sectors. Come to the experts within those sectors. Put them on a trade mission. See where it goes to. But ensure that we're all connected with the FCDO.
Do you think we're missing opportunity at the moment?
Yep.
Yeah. Jason.
I mean, similar. It is defining what the strategic objectives are over the next 3 to 5 years at UK PLC, and where those engagements are. How do you leverage major events and be specific? I think. Industry in the UK as an export.
Very good. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's been really great to hear from you. Order.